The dust devil rose from the Nevada plains just as Dustin Quade spotted the broken-down wagon on the side of the trail leading into Genoa, and something in his gut told him this would be the day that changed everything. He pulled his horse to a stop, his weathered hands tightening on the reins as he took in the scene before him. The wagon wheel was busted clean through, tilting the whole contraption at an awkward angle. A woman sat in the meager shade it provided, two small children pressed against her sides. Even from this distance, Dustin could see how thin they all were, how the woman's dress hung loose on her frame, how the children's faces looked gaunt and pale despite the relentless June sun of 1876. Dustin was 32 years old and had seen plenty of hardship in his years working cattle drives from Texas to Montana and back again. He had saved most of his wages, unlike the other cowboys who spent their pay on whiskey and cards. Now he owned a small ranch just outside Genoa, nothing fancy but enough to make a decent living. He had always been the quiet type, the one who noticed things others missed, the one who helped without making a fuss about it. He urged his horse forward, approaching slowly so as not to startle them. The woman looked up, and Dustin felt something shift in his chest. She had dark hair that had once been carefully pinned, but now fell in wisps around her face. Her eyes were a startling green, and despite the obvious exhaustion and fear in them, there was a dignity there that struck him. "Madam," he said, tipping his hat as he dismounted, "looks like you could use some help." The woman straightened, her arms instinctively pulling the children closer. They were identical boys, maybe 4 years old, with the same dark hair as their mother and matching brown eyes that watched him with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "We are managing," she said, but her voice was weak, and even as she spoke, one of the boys whimpered softly. Dustin crouched down a respectful distance away, studying the broken wheel. "That axle is split clean through. This wagon is not going anywhere without serious repairs." He looked back at her. "How long have you been here?" She hesitated, then seemed to deflate. "Since yesterday morning." "My husband, She stopped, swallowing hard. "He died 2 weeks ago. Fever. We were trying to reach my sister in Sacramento, but we ran out of food 3 days ago and then the wheel broke." Dustin felt his jaw tighten. 3 days without food for her, which meant she had probably been giving what little they had to the boys. He could see it in the way she held herself, the trembling in her hands that she tried to hide. "My name is Dustin Quade. I have a ranch about an hour's ride from here. I would like to offer you and your boys a hot meal and a safe place to rest." He kept his voice gentle, steady. "No strings attached, madam, just simple hospitality." The woman's eyes filled with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. "I am Beatrice Lawson. These are my sons, Thomas and James." She looked down at the boys, then back at Dustin. "I cannot pay you." "Did not ask you to," Dustin said simply. He stood, brushing dust from his knees. "Let me get you all on my horse. I will come back for what you need from the wagon later." Beatrice looked like she wanted to argue to maintain some semblance of pride, but her maternal instinct won out. She nodded slowly. "Thank you, Mr. Quade. Dustin is fine." He moved to help her stand, and she was lighter than he expected, almost fragile. The boys stood too, clinging to her skirts. Up close, Dustin could see they were wearing clothes that had been mended many times over, their little boots worn through at the soles. Getting them all on the horse took some maneuvering. Dustin settled Beatrice in the saddle, then handed the boys up to her one at a time. They curled against their mother, and Dustin noticed Thomas had his thumb in his mouth, something that suggested he was younger in spirit than his years. He took the reins and began leading the horse toward his ranch, keeping his pace steady and easy. "How old are your boys?" he asked, partly to distract Beatrice from whatever thoughts were troubling her, partly because he genuinely wanted to know. "They will be 5 next month," she said quietly. "They are good boys, well-behaved. I can see that." Dustin glanced back. James was watching him with curious eyes while Thomas had his face buried in his mother's dress. "You come far. We were living in Virginia City. My husband worked in the mines." Beatrice's voice caught slightly. "Martin was a good man. He worked hard, but the fever came on so fast and the doctor—" She trailed off. Dustin did not push. He knew about Virginia City, knew about the silver mines and the hard life there, knew about the doctors who would not treat poor families unless they had coin up front. It was not fair, but fairness was often in short supply in Nevada territory. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip of the horses' hooves and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. The land stretched out around them, sagebrush and scattered pines, the Sierra Nevada mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful country if you knew how to appreciate it, harsh if you did not. Dustin's ranch came into view as they crested a low hill. It was not much to look at from the outside, just a simple house built of timber and stone with a barn, a corral, and a few outbuildings. But it was solid and well built, and Dustin had made it comfortable over the past 3 years since he had settled here. "It is not fancy," he said, feeling suddenly self-conscious, "but it is clean and the roof does not leak." "It looks wonderful," Beatrice said, and there was genuine warmth in her voice that made Dustin's ears feel hot. He helped them down from the horse, steadying Beatrice when her legs nearly gave out beneath her. She was weaker than she had let on, and that worried him. He guided them all into the house, the boys still clutching their mother's hands. The main room was simple but tidy. Dustin kept a clean house, a habit from his years on cattle drives where disorder could mean danger. There was a stone fireplace, a sturdy table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the window, and shelves lined with a few books and supplies. A doorway led to the bedroom, and another to a small room he used for storage. "Sit down, please," Dustin said, pulling out chairs for them. "I will get you some water first, then food." He moved quickly, drawing cool water from the pump in the kitchen and bringing it to them in tin cups. Beatrice drank deeply, then helped the boys drink, reminding them to go slowly so they would not make themselves sick. Dustin watched the care she took with them despite her own obvious need and felt a deep respect for this woman. While they drank, he stoked up the fire and set about making a simple meal. He had beans and salt pork, some dried vegetables he had traded for in town, and flour for biscuits. It was not elaborate, but it was wholesome and there was plenty of it. As he cooked, he was aware of Beatrice watching him, her green eyes following his movements around the kitchen. "You do not have a wife, Mr. Quade?" she asked quietly, and there was no coyness in the question, just honest curiosity. "No, madam. Never seemed to find the right woman, and my work kept me moving for a long time." He stirred the beans, adding a bit of molasses to sweeten them for the boys. "Only settled here 3 years ago. Been too busy building up the ranch to think much about courting." "You are kind to help us," Beatrice said. "Not many men would." Dustin shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what is right." When the food was ready, he served it up on proper plates and set the table. The boys' eyes went wide at the sight of so much food, and Beatrice had to gently remind them to wait until everyone was seated before eating. They minded her immediately, their small hands folded in their laps, even as their eyes remained fixed on the plates. "Go ahead," Dustin said, and the boys looked to their mother for permission. She nodded, and they ate with the careful intensity of children who had known hunger. Dustin made sure to keep his own portion small so there would be more for them, and he noticed Beatrice doing the same until he quietly served her more, giving her a look that said he would not take no for an answer. They ate in relative silence, just the scrape of forks on plates and the occasional satisfied sound from one of the boys. When they had finished, both Thomas and James were drooping with exhaustion, their bellies finally full. "There is a bed in the back room," Dustin said. "You all should rest. We can talk about what comes next after you have slept." Beatrice looked like she wanted to protest, but another glance at her exhausted sons changed her mind. "You are too generous, Mr. Quade." "Dustin," he reminded her gently. He led them to the bedroom, which held his own bed, a solid frame he had built himself with a good mattress stuffed with straw and wool. "Take the bed. I will be fine out in the main room." "We cannot take your bed," Beatrice protested, but she was swaying on her feet. "You can and you will." Dustin's voice was firm but kind. "Those boys need proper rest, and so do you. Please, madam, it would make me feel better knowing you were comfortable." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears again, and this time one spilled over. "I do not know how to thank you. No thanks needed." Dustin backed toward the door. "Sleep as long as you need. I will be nearby if you need anything." He closed the door gently and stood in the main room for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of Beatrice settling the boys into bed, her voice murmuring a gentle lullaby. Something in his chest ached in a way he did not quite understand. Dustin spent the rest of the afternoon tending to his animals and doing the usual ranch chores. He had a small herd of cattle, some chickens, 2 horses now that he had bought a second one last month, and a milk cow. It was manageable for one man, though it kept him busy. As he worked, his mind kept drifting back to the woman and children in his house. He tried to puzzle out what he was feeling. Certainly there was sympathy for their situation. Any decent person would feel that. But there was something else too, something in the way Beatrice had looked at him, the strength he had seen in her despite her circumstances. She had not begged or made a spectacle of her need. She had simply accepted his help with quiet dignity, and that impressed him more than he could say. The sun was setting when he finished his work and returned to the house. It was quiet inside, and he moved carefully so as not to wake anyone. He was surprised when he found Beatrice sitting in the rocking chair by the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Boys asleep?" He asked softly. She nodded. "They were exhausted. I have never heard them sleep so soundly." She turned to look at him, and in the dimming light her face looked softer, younger. "I could not sleep. My mind keeps turning over our situation." Dustin lit a lamp, adjusting the flame to a low glow. "That is understandable. You have been through a lot." "May I be frank with you, Dustin?" She used his first name carefully, as if testing how it felt. "Please. I have no money, no prospects. My sister in Sacramento, I am not even certain she is still at the address I have. We have not corresponded in 3 years. Beatrice's voice was steady, but her hands twisted in her lap. "I do not know what to do. I cannot impose on your kindness forever, but I have nothing to offer and nowhere to go." Dustin sat down in one of the straight-back chairs, his hat in his hands. He had been thinking about this very question all afternoon, turning it over in his mind while he worked. There was a practical answer, and then there was the answer his heart was pushing him toward, and surprisingly they were the same. "I have a proposition for you," he said slowly. "Now, I want you to hear me out before you say anything." Beatrice's eyes widened slightly, but she nodded. "This ranch needs more than one person to run it properly. I have been making do, but there is work I cannot get to, things that go undone because I am just one man." He met her eyes directly. "I need help with the house, with the chickens and the garden. I never seem to have time to plant properly. Come winter, there is preserving and preparing that needs doing. And those boys of yours, They will be big enough soon to help with small chores, learning how a ranch runs. You are offering me work, Beatrice said carefully. I am offering you a place here, a home for you and your boys. You would help with the house and the work you are able to do, and in return, you would have a roof over your head, food, and safety. He paused, then added, separate sleeping arrangements, of course. I would move out to the storage room. It is big enough for a bed. Beatrice stared at him. You would do this for strangers. You would not be strangers for long, Dustin said simply. And I believe people should help each other when they can. I can do this, so I am offering. People would talk, Beatrice said quietly. A widow and a single man living under one roof. Let them talk. Anyone who knows me knows I am not a man who would take advantage. Dustin's voice was firm. But if it would make you feel better, we could make it legal. Beatrice's breath caught. Legal? Dustin felt his face heat up, but he pressed on. He had thought about this too during the long afternoon hours. A marriage of convenience, just on paper, to protect your reputation and make sure you and the boys have legal standing here. We would not. That is, it would not be a real marriage in the other ways. Just an arrangement to make sure you are all protected and provided for. The silence stretched out between them. Dustin could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears. He had never proposed to a woman before, and this was certainly not how he had imagined it might happen someday. Why would you do this? Beatrice's voice was barely above a whisper. You do not know me. You do not know anything about me. I know you love your sons. I know you are strong and proud, and you have survived things that would break most people. I know you are kind and grateful, and you have not once complained despite everything you have been through. Dustin set his hat on the table. That is enough for me to know you are a good person deserving of help. Beatrice stood abruptly and walked to the window, her back to him. Dustin waited, his heart still pounding. He had laid his cards on the table, and now all he could do was wait for her answer. I was married to Martin for 6 years, she said finally. I loved him very much. He was a good husband and a wonderful father. When he died, I thought my whole world had ended. She turned back to face Dustin. I am not looking for love again. My heart is not ready for that, may never be ready for that. I am not asking for your heart, Dustin said gently, just offering you a partnership. A way forward for you and those boys. And if you meet someone, a woman you want to truly marry, then we would handle that if it comes. But honestly, Beatrice, I am 32 years old and I have never been in love. I am not sure I am the type for it. What I am is practical, and this is a practical solution that helps us both. Beatrice studied his face for a long moment. You are a very unusual man, Dustin Quade. I will take that as a compliment. A small smile tugged at her lips, the first he had seen from her. It was meant as one. She took a deep breath. If we did this, if I agreed, I would need to know some things. I would need to know that my boys would be safe, that they would be treated well. I would never harm a child, Dustin said firmly. I know I am a stranger to them now, but I hope in time they would come to trust me. I would do my best to be good to them, to teach them what I know and help them grow into good men. And me? What would you expect from me? Honestly, just what I said. Help with the house and the work, someone to talk to over supper, maybe eventually a friend. Dustin leaned forward slightly. I have been alone a long time, Beatrice. I am not looking to force anything on anyone. I just think maybe we could help each other. Beatrice was quiet for another long moment, then she nodded slowly. All right. I accept your offer, Dustin, but I want to be clear that if at any point this arrangement is not working for either of us, we should be honest about it. Agreed. Dustin stood, feeling relief wash over him. We can go into town tomorrow, see the preacher, and make it official. That is, if you are feeling strong enough. I will be fine after a good night's sleep and some more food. Beatrice extended her hand formally. Thank you, Dustin, truly. He took her hand, struck by how small it felt in his. Her skin was rough from hard work, but her grip was firm. You are welcome, Beatrice, and thank you for trusting me. That night, Dustin made himself a bedroll in the main room while Beatrice and the boys slept in the bedroom. He lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and wondering what he had just committed himself to. He was not a rash man by nature. He thought things through, weighed his options. But something about finding Beatrice and those boys had struck him deep, and he knew he could not have lived with himself if he had just ridden past. Besides, what he had told her was true. The ranch did need more hands, and he had been thinking about how he would manage as he got older. This way, he would have help, and in time, the boys could learn the work. It was practical, but lying there in the dark, listening to the soft sounds of breathing from the other room, Dustin acknowledged to himself that there was more to it than practicality. There was something about Beatrice that drew him, something in her quiet strength and the tender way she cared for her sons. He was not in love, he told himself firmly, but he could admit he was intrigued, interested in getting to know her better. Morning came with the crow of his rooster. Dustin rose, built up the fire, and started breakfast. He was frying eggs when Beatrice emerged from the bedroom, her hair neatly pinned up and her dress straightened as much as possible. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning. Sleep well. Better than I have in weeks." She moved to the kitchen area. "Let me help with that." They worked together easily, Beatrice taking over the eggs while Dustin sliced bread and put coffee on to boil. It felt strangely natural, having someone else in the kitchen with him, and Dustin found himself relaxing into the rhythm of it. The boys woke soon after and came tumbling out of the bedroom, looking more rested and much livelier than they had the day before. Thomas was still shy, hiding partly behind his mother's skirts, but James came right up to Dustin. "Are you a real cowboy?" he asked, his brown eyes wide. Dustin crouched down to the boy's level. "I suppose I am. I work with cattle and horses." "You have a gun?" Thomas piped up from his hiding spot. "I do, but it is locked up safe unless I need it for protecting the animals from predators." Dustin kept his voice gentle. "Guns are not toys." "Our papa had a gun," James said matter-of-factly, "but he had to sell it before he died, to buy medicine." Beatrice's face tightened with pain, but she said nothing, just began serving the boys their breakfast. Dustin felt a surge of sympathy for what this family had been through. They ate together, and Dustin explained his plan for the day. "I thought we would ride into Genoa this morning. It is not a long trip. We need to see the preacher and also get you all some supplies." "I told you I have no money," Beatrice said quietly, "and I told you this is a partnership. Partners help each other out." Dustin met her eyes. "Consider it an advance on your wages if it makes you feel better." Beatrice nodded slowly, though he could see the struggle in her expression. She was a woman used to making her own way, and accepting charity clearly did not sit easy with her. He respected that. After breakfast, Dustin hitched up his small wagon. He normally rode horseback everywhere, but with the boys it made more sense to take the wagon. He helped Beatrice and the twins up onto the seat, then climbed up himself and took the reins. The ride into Genoa took about 45 minutes. The boys were fascinated by everything they saw, pointing out birds and asking questions about the plants and animals. Dustin answered patiently, and he noticed Beatrice watching him with an expression he could not quite read. Genoa was a small town, established back in 1851 and serving as a stop for folks heading to California. It had a main street with a general store, a saloon, a hotel, a church, and various other businesses. It was not fancy, but it was a real town with real people, and Dustin had come to think of it as home. He pulled the wagon up in front of the church. a simple white building with a small steeple. Reverend Thomas Miller was a good man in his 50s who had been serving the community for nearly a decade. "Wait here a moment," Dustin said. "Let me make sure he is available." He found the Reverend in his small office, working on Sunday's sermon. The older man looked up with a smile when Dustin knocked. "Dustin Quade, good to see you, son. What brings you by? I need to ask a favor, Reverend." Dustin removed his hat. "I need you to perform a marriage ceremony, today if possible." Reverend Miller's eyebrows rose. "A marriage? Well, this is sudden. Who is the lucky lady?" Dustin explained the situation quickly, about finding Beatrice and the boys, about his offer and her acceptance. The Reverend listened carefully, his expression growing thoughtful. "This is a very generous thing you are doing, Dustin," he said when Dustin finished. "But marriage is a sacred bond. Are you certain this is the right path?" "I am certain I want to help this family, and this is the best way to do it," Dustin said firmly. "I know it is not a conventional situation, but I believe it is the right thing." The Reverend studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, bring the lady in and let me meet her. If she is agreeable and of sound mind, I will perform the ceremony." Dustin returned to the wagon and helped Beatrice down. The boys stayed in the wagon, and he promised them they would go to the general store after. Inside the church, Beatrice stood straight and tall as Dustin introduced her to Reverend Miller. The Reverend took her hands in his expression kind. "Mrs. Lawson, Dustin has told me of your situation and his offer. I need to know from you that you are entering into this arrangement of your own free will without coercion." "I am," Beatrice said clearly. "Mr. Quade has been nothing but kind and respectful. I understand what he is offering and I accept it freely. And you understand that marriage is a sacred commitment before God." Beatrice hesitated, then said, "I do, Reverend. I also understand that sometimes God works in unexpected ways. I believe I was meant to find Mr. Quade on that road. I believe this is the path forward for my sons and myself." The Reverend smiled. "Well said, my dear. Then if you are both certain, let us proceed." The ceremony was simple and brief. They stood before the altar, just the three of them, with the morning light streaming through the plain glass windows. Dustin spoke his vows in a steady voice, promising to honor and protect Beatrice and her sons. Beatrice's voice trembled slightly, but did not break as she promised to be a faithful wife and partner. When it came time to exchange rings, Dustin pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. It was the only piece of jewelry he owned, kept all these years in his saddlebag. He had not planned this, but it felt right as he slipped it onto Beatrice's finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Miller said. "You may kiss the bride if you wish." Dustin and Beatrice looked at each other. After a moment, Dustin leaned in and pressed a gentle, chaste kiss to her cheek. Her skin was soft and he caught the faint scent of lavender. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Quade," the Reverend said warmly. "May God bless your union." They signed the marriage certificate, the Reverend and his wife serving as witnesses. As they walked back out into the sunlight, Dustin felt the weight of what they had just done settle over him. He was married now. He had a wife and, in a way, 2 sons. His life had changed completely in less than 24 hours. Beatrice was quiet as they walked to the wagon, her eyes on the ring on her finger. The boys looked up expectantly. "Is everything all right, Mama?" James asked. Beatrice smiled at her sons. "Everything is fine, darling. Mr. Quade and I just had some business to take care of. Now, I believe someone promised you a trip to the general store." The boys cheered, and Dustin could not help but smile. He drove the wagon down to the general store, a well-stocked establishment run by a couple named the Petersons. Martha Peterson was a sharp-eyed woman who noticed everything, and she looked very interested when Dustin walked in with Beatrice and the twins. "Morning, Dustin," she said, her eyes darting between him and Beatrice. "Who do we have here?" "Martha, this is my wife, Beatrice, and her sons Thomas and James." The words felt strange in his mouth, but he said them clearly. "Beatrice, this is Martha Peterson. She and her husband run the best store in the territory." Martha's eyes went wide, but she recovered quickly. "Your wife." "Well, congratulations. I had no idea you were courting anyone." "It was a quick courtship," Dustin said blandly. "We need to get some supplies. Clothes for Beatrice and the boys, some fabric, thread, whatever else might be needed." He left Beatrice with Martha, knowing the storekeeper would help her better than he could, and took the boys to look at the toys and candy. He bought them each a peppermint stick, their faces lighting up with joy at the simple treat. While they sucked on their candy, he picked out some basics. Sturdy work clothes for them, small boots that would last, warm coats for when winter came. On the other side of the store, he could hear Martha chattering away to Beatrice, asking questions. Beatrice answered politely, but did not offer much information. Dustin appreciated her discretion. By the time they were done, the wagon was loaded with supplies. Fabric and thread for making clothes, some ready-made dresses for Beatrice, clothes and boots for the boys, food staples to replenish what they would use, seeds for a garden, and various household items Dustin had been meaning to buy but never had. Martha totaled everything up, and Dustin paid without comment, though he could see Beatrice's face pale slightly at the cost. He would have to find a way to help her understand that he did not begrudge the expense, that he had saved his money for years for exactly this kind of thing, but he suspected that would take time. As they drove back toward the ranch, the boys dozed off in the back of the wagon, exhausted from the excitement. Beatrice sat quietly beside Dustin, her hands folded in her lap. "That was very generous," she said finally. "The clothes, everything. It was too much." "It was necessary," Dustin corrected gently. "You and the boys needed proper clothes, and you will need fabric to make more as they grow. None of it was too much. I will work hard to repay you, Beatrice." He waited until she looked at him. "This is not a debt. This is us building a life together, even if it is not a conventional one. What I have is yours now, and what you bring to this partnership is equally valuable. Please try to see it that way." She studied his face, then slowly nodded. "I will try. It is difficult for me. I am not used to depending on anyone. I understand that, but sometimes depending on each other is what makes us stronger." He returned his attention to the road. "You can depend on me, Beatrice. I give you my word on that." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the steady clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds besides the occasional snore from one of the boys. "Can I ask you something?" Beatrice said eventually. "Of course. Why did you never marry before? You are a good man, clearly capable and kind. Surely there were women who would have been interested." Dustin considered the question. "I suppose I never met anyone who made me want to change my life. I liked the freedom of the cattle drives, the moving from place to place. And when I did settle here, I was so focused on building the ranch that I did not think much about courting." He paused. "Truth is, I am not good at small talk and flirting. I am too practical, too straightforward. Most women seem to want poetry and romance." "Some women," Beatrice said softly. "But some women appreciate honesty and reliability more than pretty words." Dustin felt his ears get hot again. "What about you? How did you meet your husband?" "Martin was a friend of my father's. He was older than me by 10 years. When my father died, Martin offered to marry me so I would be provided for. So I suppose in a way my first marriage was also one of convenience, though it grew into love over time. Her voice was wistful. He was a good man, simple but good. He loved the boys so much. I am sorry for your loss, Dustin said quietly. Truly. Thank you. Beatrice looked out at the passing landscape. I think Martin would have approved of you. He would have wanted to know the boys were safe and cared for. That matters more to me than anything else. They arrived back at the ranch in the early afternoon. Dustin unloaded the wagon while Beatrice woke the boys and took them inside. He heard her exclaiming over the house, seeing it properly for the first time in daylight, and felt a small surge of pride. Over the next few days, they settled into a routine. Dustin moved his belongings into the storage room, which was indeed large enough for a bed and his few possessions. Beatrice took over the bedroom with the boys, and she immediately set about making the house more of a home. She cleaned thoroughly, organized the kitchen, and started using the fabric he had bought to make curtains and tablecloths. The boys were shy around Dustin at first, but he was patient with them. He showed them the animals, let them help collect eggs from the chickens, taught them how to brush the horses. Thomas warmed up first, fascinated by the cattle and asking endless questions. James was more reserved, watching Dustin carefully as if trying to decide if he could be trusted. One evening about a week after the wedding, Dustin was showing the boys how to whittle. He had given them each a small piece of soft wood and a dull knife, teaching them how to carve safely. Thomas was making what he said was a horse, though it looked more like a lumpy stick. James was quiet, focused on his piece. My papa used to whittle, James said suddenly. He made me a bird once. I had to leave it behind when we left Virginia City. Dustin's hands stilled. What kind of bird was it? A robin. It was not very good, but I liked it. James's voice was matter of fact, but his eyes were sad. Well, how about we work on making you another one? Dustin said gently. We can practice together and eventually you will be good enough to make your own. James looked up at him, something shifting in his expression. You would do that? Of course, and maybe we can make Thomas his horse too once we get better at it. I want a cow, Thomas announced. A big one, Dustin chuckled. All right, a cow it is, but that is going to take a lot of practice. He looked up to find Beatrice watching them from the doorway, her hand pressed to her mouth and tears in her eyes. When she realized he had seen her, she quickly wiped her face and smiled. Supper is ready, she said, her voice only slightly unsteady. That night, after the boys were in bed, Beatrice joined Dustin on the porch. He was sitting on the steps, looking out at the stars. She sat down beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. Thank you for being so good to them, she said quietly. They have been through so much. Seeing them smile again, hearing them laugh, it means everything to me. They are good boys, easy to be kind to. Dustin leaned back on his hands. They talk about their father sometimes. I do not want them to forget him. I appreciate that. Beatrice was quiet for a moment. I worried they would forget. They are so young and memories fade. We will make sure they remember, Dustin said firmly. He was their father and he loved them. That deserves to be honored. Beatrice looked at him, and in the moonlight her eyes were luminous. You are a remarkable man, Dustin Quade. Just doing what is right, he said, but he felt warm under her gaze. They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. It was peaceful in a way Dustin had never quite felt before, even in all his years of solitude. Having Beatrice beside him, knowing the boys were safe inside, it felt like something he had not known he was missing. The weeks passed, and summer deepened into its full heat. Beatrice proved to be an excellent housekeeper and a hard worker. She planted a garden that flourished under her care, tended the chickens with efficiency, and kept the house spotless. She was also a wonderful cook, making meals that far surpassed Dustin's simple bachelor fare. But more than that, She was good company. In the evenings after the boys were in bed, they would sit together and talk. Beatrice told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her parents and the sister she hoped to reconnect with someday. Dustin talked about his years on the cattle drives, the places he had seen, the men he had worked with. He found himself looking forward to those conversations more and more. Beatrice was intelligent and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard sometimes and made him laugh. She listened when he talked about his plans for the ranch, offering suggestions that were often quite good. She had a practical mind and a creative spirit, an unusual combination that he found increasingly appealing. One hot afternoon in late July, Dustin was working on repairing a section of fence when he heard shouting from the direction of the house. He dropped his tools and ran, his heart pounding with worry. He found Beatrice in the yard, holding a hoe and facing down a rattlesnake that had coiled near the chicken coop. The boys were on the porch, their eyes wide with fear. "Stay still," Dustin said quietly. He moved carefully, circling around to get a better angle. In one smooth motion, he grabbed the snake just behind its head and carried it quickly away from the house, releasing it far out in the brush where it slithered away. When he returned, Beatrice was standing exactly where he had left her, the hoe still raised. She was trembling now, the fear she had held back flooding through her. Dustin gently took the hoe from her hands and set it aside. "You did good. You kept the boys safe and you did not panic." "I was terrified," she admitted, her voice shaking. "But you did not show it. That takes real courage." He wanted to put his arms around her to comfort her, but he held back. They had maintained a careful physical distance since the wedding, never touching beyond the occasional accidental brush of hands. Beatrice looked up at him, her green eyes bright. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Always," he said simply. Later that night, after the boys had finally calmed down from the excitement and gone to sleep, Beatrice joined Dustin on the porch as had become their habit. But instead of sitting on the opposite end of the step, she sat close to him, their shoulders almost touching. "I realized something today," she said softly. "When that snake was there and I was afraid, my first thought was Dustin will come. Dustin will help. I have not relied on anyone like that since Martin died. I had forgotten what it felt like to know someone would come for you." Dustin felt his chest tighten. "I will always come for you, Beatrice. You and the boys, that is a promise." She turned to look at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "I know you will. I trust you, Dustin, completely." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Dustin did not quite know how to name. Then Beatrice leaned her head against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that made his heart race. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, and Dustin thought maybe this was what happiness felt like. August brought the boys' 5th birthday. Beatrice had been planning for weeks, saving eggs and butter to make a special cake. Dustin had been working on something too, carving in the evenings after everyone else was asleep. On the morning of their birthday, the boys woke to find presents waiting for them. From Beatrice, new shirts she had sewn, lovingly embroidered with their initials. From Dustin, carved wooden animals. For Thomas, a cow that actually looked like a cow this time, with careful details and smooth edges. For James, a robin in mid-flight, delicate and beautiful. James held his robin with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "It is just like the one Papa made, but better." "Not better," Dustin said gently. "Just different. Your Papa's was special because he made it. This one is special too, but it does not replace the other one. It is just another robin to remember him by." James threw his arms around Dustin's waist, hugging him tight. "Thank you, Dustin." "Thank you so much." Dustin's arms came around the boy automatically, and he looked up to see Beatrice crying again, but these were happy tears. Thomas joined the hug, and for a moment Dustin was surrounded by the boys, their small arms holding him tight, and he felt something crack open in his chest. This was what he had been missing all those years. This was what made a house a home. Not the building or the land, but the people in it, the love and trust and connection between them. That evening, after cake and games and all the birthday festivities, after the boys had finally crashed into exhausted sleep, Beatrice and Dustin sat on the porch again. She had taken to sitting close to him now, and tonight she reached out and took his hand. "What you did for them today, those carvings," she said softly. "That was not from a man who is just being practical. That was from a man who cares deeply." Dustin looked down at their joined hands, her small fingers laced through his larger ones. "I do care. About them and about you. More than I expected to when I made that offer back in June." "I care too," Beatrice whispered. "I told you I was not ready for love again, that my heart was not ready. But Dustin, I think I was wrong. I think my heart has been healing and you have been the one helping it heal." Dustin turned to her, hardly daring to breathe. "Beatrice." "I am falling in love with you," she said, her voice steady now, sure. "I did not think it was possible, not this soon, not after Martin. But you have been so good, so kind and patient and wonderful. You have given me back my life and my hope, and you have been a father to my boys in ways I never dared hope for. How could I not fall in love with you?" "I love you too," Dustin said, the words coming easily now that he allowed himself to say them. "I think I started falling for you that first day, when you sat in that wagon with your boys, and you were starving and scared, but you still had dignity and strength. Every day since has just made me love you more." Beatrice reached up and touched his face, her hand soft against his weathered cheek. This was supposed to be a marriage of convenience. "Maybe it started that way," Dustin said, covering her hand with his, "but it does not have to stay that way. If you are willing, if you want this to be a real marriage in every sense, then I would like that very much." "I want that too," Beatrice said. "I want to be your wife truly. I want us to be a real family." Dustin leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted to. But she did not pull back. Instead, she met him halfway, and their lips came together in a kiss that was nothing like the chaste peck at the wedding. This was real and deep and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Dustin rested his forehead against hers. "I will do everything I can to make you happy, Beatrice. I swear it." "You already do," she said simply, "just by being you." That night, Dustin helped Beatrice move his belongings back into the main bedroom. They lay together in the bed he had built, holding each other close, and talked long into the night about their hopes and dreams for the future. It felt like a new beginning, a real marriage starting from this moment. The next few weeks were some of the happiest of Dustin's life. He and Beatrice grew closer every day, learning each other in new ways. They laughed together, worked together, and at night they held each other close. The physical intimacy between them was tender and sweet, both of them taking their time to truly know each other. The boys noticed the change in their relationship and seemed delighted by it. One morning, Thomas asked Dustin, "Are you our papa now?" Dustin crouched down to the boy's level. "I would like to be, if that is all right with you. I will never try to replace your first papa. He was a good man and he loved you, but I love you too, and I would be honored if you wanted to call me papa." Thomas thought about this seriously. "Can we have two papas, one who is in heaven and one who is here?" "Absolutely," Dustin said, his throat tight with emotion. "That sounds perfect." James, who had been listening, came over and took Dustin's hand. "Then you are our papa, our second papa." From that day on, the boys called him Papa, and every time they did, Dustin felt his heart swell with love and pride. He was a father now, not by blood but by choice and love, and it was the greatest honor of his life. September came with cooler temperatures and the hard work of preparing for winter. Dustin and Beatrice worked side by side, harvesting the garden, preserving vegetables, smoking meat, and making sure they had enough firewood stacked. The boys helped as much as they could, learning and growing stronger every day. One evening, as they were finishing up the day's work, Beatrice suddenly swayed and had to catch herself on the fence post. Dustin was at her side immediately, his arm around her waist. "What is wrong? Are you ill?" Beatrice shook her head, a strange smile on her face. "Not ill. At least, not in the way you mean." She looked up at him. "Dustin, I think I might be with child." Dustin felt like the world had stopped. "With child, you mean we are going to have a baby? I am not certain yet, but the signs are there. It would make sense given." She blushed slightly. "Given how things have been between us." Dustin swept her up in his arms, spinning her around gently before setting her back down. "A baby, Beatrice, that is wonderful," she laughed, her face glowing with happiness. "You are happy about it?" "Happy? I am beyond happy. I am." He could not find the words, so he kissed her instead, pouring all his joy and love into it. The boys came running over, curious about the commotion. Beatrice knelt down to their level. "How would you two feel about having a baby brother or sister?" Thomas and James looked at each other, then back at their mother. "Really?" James asked. "A real baby." "A real baby," Beatrice confirmed. The boys whooped with excitement, and suddenly Dustin found himself in the middle of a group hug, all of them laughing and talking over each other. He looked down at his family, his wife and sons and the baby that would come, and felt a profound sense of gratitude and completion. The next few months passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. Dustin built a cradle from smooth pine, carving it with care and love. Beatrice sewed baby clothes, her hands never idle. The boys painted rocks to decorate the baby's corner of the room and practiced being quiet for when the baby would need to sleep. December brought the first real snow, blanketing the ranch in white. Beatrice's belly was round and full now, and Dustin watched her carefully, making sure she did not overwork herself. She chided him for being overprotective, but he could tell she appreciated the care. On a quiet night in late December, with snow falling softly outside, Beatrice's pains began. Dustin had ridden into town the week before to fetch Mrs. Henderson, an experienced midwife, and she had agreed to stay at the ranch as Beatrice's time drew near. The labor was long but not difficult, and as the sun rose on a new day, Dustin heard the most beautiful sound in the world, his child's first cry. Mrs. Henderson called him in, and he entered the bedroom to find Beatrice exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "A son," she said softly. "We have a son." Dustin approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair and his eyes squeezed shut. He was the most perfect thing Dustin had ever seen. "Can I hold him?" he asked quietly. Beatrice placed the baby in his arms, and Dustin felt his whole world shift. This was his son, his blood, the future. He looked at Beatrice, saw the love shining in her eyes, and felt tears stream down his own face. "What should we name him?" Beatrice asked. They had discussed names for weeks, but now that the baby was here, Dustin knew exactly what felt right. "Daniel, after my father. Daniel Martin Quade, if that is all right with you, to honor both our fathers." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears. "Daniel Martin Quade, it is perfect." Thomas and James were allowed in to meet their new brother, and they were awed by the tiny baby. They took turns gently touching his little hands, making promises to be good big brothers and protect him always. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Dustin sat in the rocking chair holding Daniel while Beatrice rested. He looked around the room at his sleeping family and thought back to that day in June when he had found them by the side of the road. 6 months ago, he had been alone, a solitary man with a practical outlook and no expectations of love or family. Now he had everything he had never known he wanted: a wife he loved desperately, 2 wonderful sons who called him Papa, and a newborn baby who was his own flesh and blood. His quiet offer on that dusty Nevada road had indeed changed 3 lives forever. But it had changed his life too, in ways he could never have imagined. He had gained not just a family but a purpose, a reason to build something lasting and good. Winter gave way to spring, and Daniel grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who smiled at everyone and everything. Thomas and James doted on him, helping to entertain him and always wanting to be involved in his care. Beatrice had never looked more beautiful to Dustin than she did that spring, her face alight with happiness as she worked in her expanding garden or sang while she cooked. Their love had deepened into something rich and enduring, tested by the challenges of daily life and strengthened by every shared joy and difficulty. One warm day in April, a year after Dustin had first found Beatrice and the boys, they held a small celebration. Reverend Miller came out to the ranch along with a few of the townspeople who had become friends. It was not a party for any specific occasion, just a gathering to mark the year and give thanks. As the sun set and their guests departed, Dustin and Beatrice stood together on the porch, watching Thomas and James play with Daniel in the yard. The baby was sitting up now, giggling at his brother's antics. "Hard to believe it has only been a year," Beatrice said, leaning against Dustin's side. "It feels like we have always been together." "Best year of my life," Dustin said simply. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "I know we did not start this in a conventional way, but Beatrice, I want you to know that I meant every word of the vows I spoke that day. You are my wife, my partner, my love. I cannot imagine my life without you and the boys and Daniel." "And I cannot imagine mine without you," Beatrice said. "You saved us, Dustin, in every way a person can be saved. You gave us a home and a future, but more than that, you gave us love and security and hope. I thank God every day for that broken wagon wheel that brought us to you." They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, their children playing happily nearby, the ranch they had built together stretching out around them. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Thomas and James grew into strong, capable young men who worked hard and learned everything Dustin could teach them about running a ranch. Daniel was a sweet-natured boy who followed his older brothers everywhere and showed an early talent for working with horses. Dustin and Beatrice were blessed with 2 more children over the years. A daughter they named Sarah in 1878, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's quiet strength, and another son, Michael, in 1880, who was adventurous and bold from the moment he could walk. The family grew and thrived, and the ranch became known throughout the territory as a well-run, prosperous operation. But more than that, it was known as a place of warmth and welcome, where travelers could always find a meal and a kind word, where neighbors helped neighbors, and where love was the foundation of everything. Thomas and James never forgot their first father, but they loved Dustin as completely as any sons could love their papa. When they were old enough to understand the full story of how their mother and Dustin had come together, they marveled at the courage and kindness it had taken on both sides. "You took a chance on us," James said to Dustin one day when he was 15, nearly grown. "We were strangers and you could have ridden right past, but you did not. Why?" Dustin thought about it for a moment. "Because it was the right thing to do. And because something in my heart told me that finding you all was going to change my life. I just did not know how much. I am glad you stopped, James said quietly. I am glad you made us your family. I am glad too, son. Every single day. As the children grew older and started lives of their own, Thomas became a rancher like his father, marrying a sweet girl from town and starting his own spread nearby. James surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, wanting to help other children learn and grow. Daniel followed in Dustin's footsteps completely, taking over more and more of the ranch work as Dustin got older. Sarah married a good man and settled in Genoa, where she opened a dress shop. Michael, the adventurous one, became a lawman, bringing justice and order to the growing territory. Dustin and Beatrice grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They sat on the same porch where they had first admitted their feelings, now weathered and worn but still sturdy, and watched their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once played. "Do you ever regret it?" Beatrice asked one evening when they were both in their 60s, her hand still fitting perfectly in his. "The way we started, the practical arrangement that changed into something else." "Not for one single second," Dustin said firmly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Beatrice. You and all our children. I would not change a moment of it." "Neither would I," she said softly. "You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. How could I ever regret that?" They sat together as they had done for so many years, watching the sun set over the Nevada plains, their children and grandchildren's laughter echoing across the ranch. The quiet offer Dustin had made on that dusty road so many years ago had indeed changed 3 lives forever. But it had done more than that. It had created a legacy of love and kindness, of hard work and dedication, of family and commitment that would extend through generations. Thomas and James's children would tell their children about the cowboy who stopped to help a starving widow and her twins, about how one act of simple human decency had built something beautiful and lasting. Dustin passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Beatrice holding his hand just as she had held it for so many years. His last words to her were simple. "Best decision I ever made was stopping that day. Love you, Beatrice. Always have, always will." Beatrice lived another 5 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She spent those years telling stories about Dustin, making sure everyone knew what an extraordinary man he had been, how his quiet strength and unwavering kindness had shaped all their lives. When she passed, they buried her next to Dustin on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a headstone that read, "Beatrice Quade, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She was loved beyond measure." Next to it, Dustin's stone read, "Dustin Quade, a man who lived with honor and loved with his whole heart." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through Daniel's line. And always on the mantel in the main house, there sat 2 carved wooden animals, a cow and a robin, carefully preserved, reminders of the day a cowboy's quiet offer changed 3 lives forever, and in doing so created a love story that would endure through the ages. The twins, Thomas and James, both lived long, full lives, never forgetting the father who had raised them or the one who had saved them. They told their children and their children's children about both men, about Martin who had loved them first, and Dustin who had chosen to love them second, teaching them that family was not just about blood but about commitment and care, and showing up every single day. And so the story of Dustin and Beatrice became part of the fabric of Genoa, Nevada, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the simplest acts of human kindness. A cowboy had found a starving widow with twins on a dusty road, made a quiet offer without expecting anything in return, and in doing so, had found the great love of his life and built a family that would endure for generations. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth passing down through the years as a reminder that one person's kindness can change the world, one act of generosity can build a legacy, and one quiet offer can indeed change 3 lives forever, creating ripples of love and goodness that extend far beyond what anyone could have imagined on that hot June day in 1876, when fate brought 2 lonely souls together on the road to Genoa.